Set it live.
Go live.
Go live.
Oh,
Oh,
spelled
no.
the same. Oops, I just
Yeah.
punched my microphone. I
Oh,
do
dear.
want to just make sure that we are live, so I'm going to open this in a new tab.
Okay.
Okay, yeah, we're live. Easy.
All right, cool. Hi, everybody.
Hi, everybody.
It's always so awkward when we start these streams. I feel like we should just, have I don't know, a go-to cold open or something.
We should spend a bunch of money on a 30-second intro video that plays before each stream.
There we go. Now we
That'd
just
be a
dive
good
right
idea.
in.
Yeah. Although it's not technically 11 o'clock yet, or 9 o'clock yet, so
Yeah.
we can't assume that we are actually, the stream isn't started officially, I guess.
Oh, dear.
Okay, now it is.
Okay.
All right, well, here we are. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Welcome to February stream. It feels like we haven't had a stream for more than a month, but we did a January one.
Yeah, time is
I don't know
weird.
why.
Time is a flat cycle.
It's fake.
It's all fake.
Such a fake thing.
Dude, I can't believe February is over already.
And we had an extra day. It was the long February.
When did that happen? Where did it go?
I do not know. I would have sworn that yesterday was the 4th or 5th.
Mhm.
Uh-oh. Did I die or did Ethan? Oh, no, Ethan's back. Okay.
I hope I didn't die.
You had just a quick little hiccup, little freeze.
Oh, let me make sure that I'm on the right internet. 1 sec.
All right, well, it's just me for now. Until Ethan potentially revives back from the dead. Potentially.
All right, having it. Testing, can you hear me?
You're a little blurry, but I can hear you and I can see you.
Blurry, that's not good. I switched from my wireless to my wired.
Huh. Oh, there. Now it's better.
Okay.
Okay, probably
Just
just connecting.
Yeah.
All right, well.
Yeah,
now that you're wired.
It would default to the wired one, but no, it's still on the wireless one.
Yeah, I actually just turn off Wi-Fi on my computer, so it's always...
Yeah, I would normally do that. I just forgot.
Rookie mistake.
I know. Amateur mistake, pro recovery.
Absolutely. Speaking of pro recovery, how was your language learning?
Not great, but I did just go on vacation, so that was fun.
Oh, good. That counts, right?
Yeah, exactly. I went skiing in Utah, and that was a lovely time. So I have not been skiing in many a year, and
nice.
It was really good.
Do you just do downhill skiing, or are you into any kind of special skiing?
I like tree skiing. It's my favorite. So I was at a Snowbird on Tuesday, and it was super cold and windy. So the only place that was actually fun to ski was in the trees, where it breaks the wind and you it's a little bit warmer, and it had just snowed. It snowed 6 inches or something. So nice powder.
Lovely.
So it's definitely the kind of skiing that I like, but nobody else that I was with liked it. They all went inside after 3 runs.
That sounds like me.
Yeah.
My dad's one of his favorite things in the world to do is ski.
Mm-hmm.
But as an 8-year-old, he would like to take me skiing, obviously. However, an 8-year-old can't go ski for 6 to 7 to 8 hours in a day.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up not really liking skiing that much, despite actually liking the skiing part. But I'd be like, okay, that's enough runs for now. I want to go inside and drink hot chocolate. But he's like, no, come on, let's go. 2 more hours, 2 more hours. It's like, come on. I'm 8.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. I feel like you have to have a if you want to do that, you need to have somebody in the lodge to take the child at lunchtime.
But I did learn to ski, and it's definitely fun, and I'm hoping to go pretty soon again, because I haven't been like you in many, many years.
Are you coming back to the States to do that, or are you going to try and find a place in Mexico?
Yeah. I think there's one spot in Mexico to ski, but I don't think it's that nice. I don't think it's that desired for skiing.
I have no idea. So,
but no,
there are some very high altitudes. So,
I live at 2,500 meters,
mm-hmm.
It's 7,000 feet. But there's never snow here. So
right.
People from here have never seen snow in person. It's you see it in the movies. That's it.
Yep.
Anyways, I think that's enough chit chat.
Yeah.
Let's get to some questions, huh?
Yeah. And as a reminder, for people watching, feel free to drop things in the
Oh
YouTube
yeah.
chat. Um, we'll take a look towards the end and answer any questions that you all have.
I'm here monitoring, so if you want to say hi or share your questions, here is the spot. But our first question comes from Jamie P, and they ask, "What should I focus on when immersing?" So they're learning Polish. And now I'm going to read it in first person. I find if I am focused on understanding what I read or listen, I can pretty much ignore what's going on with the word endings of adjectives and nouns, yada yada, and how they indicate to who was doing what to whom, etc. I don't naturally think about what gender nouns are, that sort of thing. I understand that Czech has similar grammar patterns to Polish in cases indicated by forms, da da da. And I wonder how Ben, me, is approaching this. Has he studied the language previously? Has he studied a language previously that has noun, genders, and cases? To what extent is he directing his attention to the word endings beyond what might be required to understand what is being said? Are you expecting at some future point that you will start paying attention more naturally to word endings? Is focusing solely on understanding the most efficient way to get to eventually being able to produce these word endings automatically? Or does it make sense to somehow perhaps encourage ourselves to pay more attention to grammar or word endings right from the beginning of immersing? They put in more about the question, but I think that's the gist of it.
Cool. Well, it seems like the question's for you, so I'll give you a chance to answer first.
Sure. So, first, how I'm approaching it is really hands off. I've talked about this briefly in my videos. But from what basically everything that I've come across and seen, it is not required for understanding to really understand the grammar. It's nice to have a general idea to understand that when these two things changes, it doesn't matter. But when this changes, it does matter a lot. But that is just like the bare minimum. I actually had to do no study in Czech for this because it uses verbs a lot like Spanish does, which I've studied, and it uses cases like German does, which I've also studied in the past. And so I'm familiar with these concepts. And so I've never actually had to learn that, oh, the ending changes on a noun, which changes how it functions with the other nouns in the sentence, because just that base knowledge is enough for understanding, like he mentioned. Um, I'm not focusing on endings pretty much at all unless it is useful for understanding. Like when verbs end in a different thing, it tells you who's doing the verb. And so I'm seeing that, I'm noticing that, but I'm not really focusing on it. I'm not really trying to specifically pick that up, like process the information and then use it. I'm trying to do it a lot more naturally. This means that I am probably wrong more often than I would be if I was really specifically focusing on them, but that's not my goal. And I'm usually right. And if I'm not right, then it's pretty clear through context, or I can just move on because it's one sentence among millions that I'm going to end up immersing in. That being said, once you get to a point where you want to use the language, you do have to learn a bit more about the cases and how it works, because even native speakers don't necessarily always get these things right, because there are some cases in which cases don't really necessarily make logical sense or native sense, or there's just a correct way to put it. Like there's set phrases, or there's things that are like, oh, actually, you can't use this case here just because we don't do that. That might be natural. Otherwise, there's all these different little things that are helpful to learn, but you can do that when you're outputting, because to understand, you don't need any of that. And it's a lot easier to learn them when you already understand them. And so it's this, it's a lot easier to start with that understanding and then learn the more specific rules later, because you have actually something to understand and attach to that rule, rather than just being taught that you use a subjunctive to do this thing. It's like, okay, but I don't know what the subjunctive is. I don't understand. I don't know why it's there. But later on, it's a lot easier to go, oh, got it. Yeah, I've seen that a ton of times. I understand it now. Like it's just a quick explanation that you get in your high school English class when they talk about capitalizing proper nouns. You're like, oh yeah, I've seen that all over the place. I get it. Like that's how I sort of see it. Do you want to add into this grammar study?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's sort of like the broader question of like what should I focus on versus grammar in particular. I totally agree with you that grammar is just much easier to understand when you already understand. Um, when you can read
Ironic,
a
right?
rule of grammar and be like, oh, I actually already have all of the examples of that in my head to relate it to. I do think there is some value to studying grammar a little earlier on, just so that you can start to pick up on those things. So, like with subjunctive, um, there are, I don't know, like 10 super common phrases that trigger the subjunctive. And if you just study those and learn to look for them, you'll just see them all the time. You don't really need to like study, practice them. It's just knowing that they exist will help you to see them in the wild. And the more you see them in
Exactly.
the wild, the more they'll stick with you, and the more that you'll acquire them. So I do think that there is value in grammar study for noticing those kind of things. And then, as Ben mentioned, when you actually try to speak, that's where grammar study becomes the most useful, because that's when you're actually being tested against those rules, some of
Speak and
which are
write
not. Speak and
also.
write, yes. Yeah. Writing in particular is actually quite good.
Mhm.
There's a lot of great um, like spelling and grammar checkers. So you can almost immediately see if you're doing it right or not. And that can actually really help you with the immediate feedback loop to train you on those things. Studying grammar on day one is really not particularly useful in my mind outside of trying to recognize words. Like when words are modified for
Yeah.
specific inflections, that can make it really hard to notice that those words exist. And so that's why we promote the grammar primer, which sort of just gives you a sense of here is how things get modified in the language, so you can start to draw connections back to its root form. Um,
Exactly.
in terms of what to focus on in general, uh, it's not something that you like always focus on the same thing at the same time. Languages are enormous, and there are literally tens of thousands of things that you can focus on. And one of the processes that sort of every student has to get used to is it's not enough just to like sit down and do. You actually have to think about like what do I want to focus on? Where is my weak spot, and how do I address that? So we've mentioned subjunctive before. I had a weakness with subjunctive. I couldn't really recognize it, and so I just went through and like just read a bunch about different subjunctive examples. I do not particularly find the explanations very useful. This whole idea of like, oh, hypothetical, or wishes and expressions, like that did not resonate with me at all, because there's other ways to express hypotheticals that are not subjunctive. But if I just looked at the forms, the common forms of subjunctive, and I studied the conjugations of subjunctive, then I could go into my immersion and just see them. And every time I
Exactly.
see it, I'm like, oh, mental note, that's what it is. And eventually it just becomes pretty natural. And now I like don't even like, if you asked me those 10 things that I studied off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you, but like I can use them in a sentence.
Yeah, it's in some ways it's similar to learning a really like word that specifically refers to like an emotion or something like that, where you can't necessarily define the word, but you do know what it means. It's like, okay, yeah, you use it doesn't work there. That sounds weird, but it sounds good there, there, and there. It's the same sort of thing where you go, yeah, I understand the slightly different version of saying this versus this, but I can't exactly describe it because a lot of these things are very difficult to describe. There's a reason that like official like linguistic grammars are very, very thick books because they're trying to be more scientific about it, about a thing that is inherently difficult or possibly impossible to describe fully.
There's
Um,
there's this channel on YouTube that I really like. It's this redheaded girl, like Latin mom, so she speaks Spanish, but like she's
oh,
born and raised American. I'm sure you've seen her around, but she has this great video where she's like comes home and asks her mom for help with her Spanish homework. And she's role playing both roles, but she's like, "Why does it trigger the subjunctive here?" And her mom's like, "Because it sounds better." And it's like, no, no, there's like a reason. Like, why does it do it here? It's like, okay, the reason is because it sounds better.
that my specifically in Spanish, my favorite one about that is that like lelo doesn't
Mhm.
exist, even though
Mhm.
grammatically it should. It just switches to celo because that sounds better.
Yep.
And then because that sounds better, often speakers in se can be plural, but native speakers will put the plural on the wrong thing because it's like, okay, it feels like it should still have a plural anyways. And so even though it should be like leslo, they end up saying celos, which is just because it sounds better. And it's like, all
Yeah.
right, I'm in. It sounds
Yeah.
better.
Yep.
Anyways, well, thank you for the good question. Um, it's always an interesting topic. The next question we have here is from Shetos or Shitas or Cheetos. No idea how to say that name,
Cheetos?
but with like an SH.
Oh,
Cheetos.
okay. Cheetos.
Cheetos,
Okay.
maybe. But their question is how to get over that pretty good plateau.
Mhm.
I'm going to read out their question and we'll see if we can answer this. I only came across Refold fairly recently, but for the past 4 years, I've been learning English on my own, and I was doing most of your best practices without actually realizing it. My level now is pretty decent, but I still have some bad habits I built up during school before starting immersing in the language and learning it properly. My listening is probably the best among my language skills. Reading and writing are not a close second, and are a close second, maybe. And my speaking is way better than when I first started, but it's not there yet. They can open a random English video and understand at 98% plus as long as it's in an accent that they've learned before.
Mhm.
They haven't read a ton, but they can do academic. They read in academic things for their studies. ChatGPT rates them as being sort of B2 C1 in writing. They make a lot of typos, and they feel like it's part of not reading enough, and they sort of feel a bit embarrassed about that. And they have about 25 hours of speaking with language partners specifically. So the question here is, how can I improve all of my abilities, because it's not really happening on its own?
Yeah. Um, Basically, the more advanced you get, the harder it is to get more advanced.
Yep.
It's definitely an exponential curve and not linear. So when you look at a lot of the standardized tests for language learning, they basically each incremental level essentially doubles the amount that you need to know about the language. So I'm blanking on exactly what the numbers are or the estimated numbers for the CEFR, but it's something like the C1 requires 6,000, but then the C2 requires 12,000 or something like that. Whereas the B1 only requires 3,000. So it doubles every time.
Hours of
Um,
time to get there. Hours of
no, I
effort.
was talking about the number of words you need to know.
Oh, words you need to know. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Um, so you're at a point now where it seems like having that pretty good level of listening ability means that you could very well just go straight into just getting very comfortable speaking. You won't sound exactly right, but that's kind of okay unless you really really want to sound more perfect. Like there's plenty of illiterate native speakers who do not know grammar rules and speak incorrectly according to the experts or according to academics, right? So it depends on whether you want to go down the pathway of I want to get very, very comfortable expressing myself and speaking, or I want to uh, become more correct in my output. Given the complaint about making lots of typos and mistakes like that, it sounds like correctness is kind of the direction you want to take it. So um, I'm blanking on we just sent out an email about this, but I had like 4 uh, different areas in which you can improve. Um,
Comfort, accuracy,
Automaticity.
capability, and automaticity.
Yeah.
Comfort,
Uh,
accuracy, automaticity, and capability.
yeah. So the comfort level is that just requires practice. You just go talk to people for lots of time. It tends to get more comfortable around 50 hours, and then like you're very good, well off at around 200 hours. Um, but just because you're comfortable does not mean that you're actually speaking correctly. You might be saying the wrong things all the time, but as long as it gets the point across, most people won't correct you
What
anyway.
am
You'll
I
just
thinking about
sound
it then?
you'll just sound foreign. That doesn't matter to most people, honestly. But if it's like you want to, apply for a job or need to pass a test for a specific reason, then the correctness is actually very important.
Mhm.
You need to be able to do things correctly, and then you have to really dive into the grammar rules, the spelling, practice spelling, getting that immediate feedback,
Mhm.
doing a lot of reading. Like the C2 test really requires a lot of reading because it moves outside of correctness into nuance, um, which is like a whole other level of things. C1 is mostly about correctness. So, uh, what you'll need to do is identify what you actually care about and then target that. And of those 4 things, you may care about 1 or 2 of them a lot more than the other 2, and that's fine. But by focusing your energy on the thing that you care about, you'll be able to like break through the plateau in that area, and then you can move on to the next one. if you don't want to do all four all at once. And just to explain what they are, so it's comfort, which is basically how comfortable do you feel in the language? Can you like stand up and start speaking relatively quickly or writing relatively quickly without thinking too hard about it? Accuracy is can you express the ideas in the way that you actually want to, that actually like match to what you want to say, or do you have to like talk around them? Correctness is do you use the correct grammar and correct phrasings that natives would? And then automaticity is can you do all those things without thinking? How immediate are they to you? So there's
Accuracy is one
definitely
of the
over.
most. Oh, sorry. Accuracy to me is one of the most interesting ones because I think a lot of people don't realize how difficult it can be to say very specific things. Like if there was a native speaker in the room with you and you were trying to get them to like touch a very specific thing in that room, how easy or hard would that be? Because it's actually a very difficult exercise if you don't know like very specific words or directions and how to express that. No, it's slightly to the left of the blue cup or whatever, something like that, where there's a very specific thing that you're trying to explain, and
Mhm.
trying to do that automatically and comfortably is a huge barrier. And so
Yeah, I think
practice
accuracy
these
is
things.
probably the hardest one. Like comfort, you can do just through repetition.
Mhm.
Um, Automaticity, you can do mostly through repetition. Um, I keep blanking.
You said comfort, automaticity, accuracy.
What's
Accuracy is the one that you
the
can
other
mostly
C?
do through. Uh,
This is a relatively new set of ideas that
yeah,
we've come up with internally, which is why I don't have them like memorized. Um, but yeah, the accuracy one is the one that I think is actually the most difficult and the one that is actually tested most aggressively by the C2, where it's like really focused on can you express this specific idea in a very specific way. Um,
capability.
Capability, sure.
How
Um,
many things can you talk about?
yeah, yeah, exactly.
How wide is your ability?
Yeah. So we need to do more explanation and thinking about those four things. I do think it's a really valuable tool set, but it is a
Mhm.
relatively new one that we just came up with like in the past month or two.
It's also got a fantastic acronym.
Kaka.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you for the
Maybe we
question.
change that.
No, I like it. Um, great question. Yeah, we'll flesh this out a bit more, but it's basically just trying to focus on the things that you actually want to get up good at and buckling down and actually working on them. It's really easy to be comfortable and just do things that you are already good at, like turning on a
Mhm.
video and listening more. But sometimes you actually have to sit down and practice your speaking, practice your automaticity, practice your accuracy, all these things. So that's the
Yeah,
advice, I guess.
that is the core advice is don't get complacent. Don't um, say pretty good is good enough. If you actually want to be better, then keep working and it should feel like work. Like it is hard. If you're doing something hard, it's probably improving your ability.
Things worth doing are hard.
Most of them.
Next question here from introverted nerd with a W in their name potentially instead of an E, but
Hmm.
it looks like nerd to me. At what stage in your target language are you at a good place to start learning another language? Um, it's probably different for all languages depending on how similar they are, but they're just wondering in general how good you should be before starting a new language.
Um, Really depends on your goals. Like if you are trying to reach a specific milestone in some period of time with a language, then I would not recommend adding another one. Um, if it's just a matter of uh, I want to maintain one language and then add another one, then I would say a comfortable level of understanding is probably when that would be suitable. Generally, when I think about the language learning process, there's sort of like two different types of phases that you go through. You either go through a phase where you're pushing really hard to overcome some barrier, or you're gradually building. And in the gradually building phase, you can introduce something else that is hard because it's the gradually building is not really that difficult. But if you're trying to actively overcome some barrier, I would not try to actively overcome two barriers at once with two different languages. So if you can get to a level with one language where it is automatic, it's something you do every day, it's just like this slow buildup because you need to learn thousands of words or whatever else, and you're at a level where that is comfortable to do, it's fun to do, and it's easy, and it's part of your day-to-day routine, you can probably add in another language just because it fits.
Mhm.
You have that energy for that. But if you're in a phase of the language learning process where your first second language is hard still, then having a second hard language or a hard thing to do is going to divide your attention between the two. So, what I would say is don't introduce it if you're actively trying to overcome some barrier in the process. Um, but if you are cruising, then by all means, go for it.
I added in Czech once I was fluent in Spanish. Like Spanish was already easy to do, and the main thing that I was doing was using it and immersing more, which
Mm-hmm.
is easy things for me to do. And so adding in a language where I was actually focused on trying to improve and overcome barriers basically makes it like it doesn't even feel like I'm learning two languages at once, even though arguably I am. Um, the other level that I think is good is in the current roadmap is 2C. So to the point where you're just trying to get a lot more exposure because you're trying to expand your abilities. That's another great time because, like Ethan said, you're not overcoming a certain barrier at that point, and you can start something a bit newer and not really worry about splitting your attention too much and wearing yourself out, I guess.
Yeah. Generally, I probably would not introduce a new language until at least 5,000 words and like being able to comfortably understand.
Yeah,
Um, I think before that, it's just too mentally intensive to learn.
very much agreed. Good. Thank you for the question. An interesting question here, getting into AI.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've been using ChatGPT for a while to help with my writing, but they just got access to that more specific GPT function where you can train your own GPT or do something more specific.
Mm-hmm.
What are ways that we can use AI to help us language learn, essentially? And this question comes from um, Nomokezu.
Okay. Yeah, there's a ton of companies that have popped up in the past year or two
Tell
with
me
this
about it.
exact idea. I think I've talked to like four, and there's like another four that I know of.
For this week,
Um,
probably.
right, exactly. I just heard about one last week. They got $22 million in funding for a ChatGPT language learning tutor, um, which to me does not make sense, but
Yeah,
to each their own.
seems a
Um,
bit bubbly.
yeah, yeah. And then there's another one that just went through Y Combinator doing the same thing. And then our friend Bill is working on a different one. So, and then also Xiaoma just released his own. So it's
That's
like,
four right there.
yeah. And then there's a fifth one that reached out to
Oh,
us this week. Um, yeah. So, and then I think Speak is probably like another one that they're introducing.
speak?
Uh, yeah, Speak is an English learning. They started in Korea, and they are very heavy emphasis on AI, and they got a $27 million investment from OpenAI recently.
Wow.
So
It's just called speak straight
it's
up?
just called Speak.
I
Yeah,
mean, to the point, I guess. Can't fault him for
yeah,
that.
exactly. So, anyways, you're not alone in thinking ChatGPT can be a good tutor. There's hundreds of millions of dollars being invested in it right now. So, at the bare minimum, you do need to figure out a good prompt for you. We use one internally, which we can probably post somewhere. But essentially, what it does is it asks ChatGPT to just rewrite it in a corrected way and then bold the things that have been corrected and give a table of the corrections with explanation of why it did each correction. And that, at a basic level, is like it's very good.
Oh,
Um, that's gonna all right. um, So at a basic level, like a good prompt, just asking it to correct you and then explain things is sufficient for most use cases. A lot of the other AIs that are coming out are really geared more towards trying to help you practice specific topics or specific conversations or um, correct you on very specific grammar points. But at a base level, you don't really need all of those bells and whistles. You really just need to do the output, do the writing on your own, and then have ChatGPT correct you. Um, if you want to use ChatGPT as a conversation partner, that's when those other tools become more useful. But if it's just a tutor or a correction tool, there's a relatively simple prompt to make that happen.
Yeah, we'll post that
Which,
somewhere,
yeah, we can post it afterwards.
just like the Discord or something.
Yep.
My personal favorite way is actually well before writing. Is I find it really useful to be a dictionary. I have a
Mm.
custom GPT that's pretty good. It does what I want to do, where I'll just feed it a word and a sentence, and it will write a definition for that word and explain the sentence a bit, like in how it works in there, using it as context. Because with Czech dictionaries, it's so common that I just can't find the definition of the word because it's declined or changed totally, or it's just like there's a really really common colloquial ending that just isn't in any of the dictionaries, and it's so annoying to like constantly have to replace the ej to be a y with an accent. I just tell me what the word means, please. And ChatGPT, like I say, it treats me like a human, ironically, whereas
Yeah.
the things that are made by humans treat me like robots, treat me like a
Mhm.
robot. And it's really nice to just put in a word and it be like, yeah, this means this in this context. It's so nice because especially when there's like two words that mean the same thing, right? A common one in Spanish is like amo, as the noun form is a different thing completely than like when it's the conjugated verb. And if you
Mhm.
just look up the conjugate the verb, you might get the wrong thing because it's a dictionary. It doesn't know the context, but ChatGPT does,
Yeah.
and so I find it really useful for that. And um, the other one that I think is helpful is like reformatting things. If you like grabbing uh, subtitles or whatever, it just having it reformat stuff is so much nicer than dealing with just things without punctuation and whatnot. Um, and the last one that I would do if I was actually trying to like speak faster is train common scenarios. Essentially, it's like, oh, I'm trying to go to travel in Italy. I should I want to hear a couple times what like might happen when I go into a coffee shop. What are things that they might say? How can I respond? And just like get those examples there without necessarily having to schedule an hour long session that might cost me whatever amount of money, whatever. Um, and so those are some ways that I use or would use it.
Yeah. Yeah. Going back to the concept of automaticity, automaticity requires repetition,
Mhm.
and often repetition of things that are pretty boring. Um, and you do actually get this a lot with tutors, where every time you switch a tutor, you have to like re-explain who you are as a human being, and so
Yeah.
you get really good explaining just that part. And that's an example of automaticity, where you like don't even need to think about what you're saying; it flows out.
Mhm.
And so ChatGPT and other AI tutors can definitely be really helpful for practicing those kind of conversations that you're likely to have over and over and over again, just so they become 100% automatic.
And that way it's not literally following a script because you can change little things here and there. It might respond differently and you get some practice.
Yeah.
Guidance
It
on
also
the
correct you as you go. So
correct. Yeah. Guidance on in the chat says that they try to use it almost as like a replacement for SRS by putting in a bunch of new
mhm.
words they learned and saying, write me a story with these words.
Sure, that works
Um,
too.
it's not perfect, but it's nice to see the words in new contexts and see things. And it's just a nice, unique, different way to mix things up when learning new words. So
Yeah.
I can totally see that.
The one thing that I have not gotten it to do well, and I haven't actually tried recently, so maybe it's improved. Um, I tried to do a shared story writing, where like I write a paragraph and then it writes a paragraph back and forth to like create a story together and like correct me along the way. And what I found is it loses the context of the previous points in the story and starts saying things that don't really make sense of it. So that's the one area where I don't recommend it yet, at
The
least.
context window increased relatively recently from like 8K tokens to like 128K.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one coming soon. I think it's from Mithril AI that has like several million context tokens or something. So like it'll probably be better when you can have more context tokens for it to take into account.
Sure.
But I've also noticed that where it's just even if it's like the last message, it'll just say things that any human would be able to know are just contradictory statements, but it
Mm-hmm.
just doesn't really work like that.
Yeah.
And so maybe in GPT-5 it'll be even better than that, but yeah.
Yeah. In mine, it would like mix up characters in the story and
Oh, it
like,
might have been Gemini that was the humongous context window.
okay.
There was one of the new ones that's whatever. There's so many
Mm-hmm.
things happening.
There's so many of them.
Yeah. Well, good question. Thank you. Let's move on to the next question here. We have a question from Fukai Mori. How do I know if my reading material is too difficult for my level?
Mhm.
Because they say that I've been reading TV shows, subtitles, and comic books in my target language, Chinese, for several months. I wanted to try something without visual aids, so I picked up a graded reader. I barely needed to look anything up, but it took a lot of mental effort to read a single page. Would this type of material be considered too easy?
No, I think that's actually the perfect material for you. So again, back to this concept of automaticity, there's that feeling of automaticity is a subconscious thing. It's something that gets embedded in your subconscious and doesn't require effort. If you're reading something and you don't need to look things up, but you are still having to work really, really hard to parse things, that's a conscious process. You haven't yet actually taken that conscious knowledge and put it in your subconscious.
Hmm.
And so, given what you're describing, that actually sounds like the perfect tool for you to do that, to convert that conscious to subconscious knowledge, or the conscious knowledge to subconscious. Because once you do the conversion and it becomes easier to read and faster to read, everything else gets easier too.
Totally.
You have to use way less energy to be with the language. So, given that you are not looking things up, but it is still hard for you, that I would highly recommend continue going with it.
Also, because they're learning a character-based language, my guess is that there's still some room to train their brain to like instantly recognize characters as words, and so
100%.
that sounds really like just a great exercise.
Yeah.
An
So keep
example,
going with that.
I ran into something like a really good example of automaticity yesterday. I was recording a short demo for the channel, and I came across. I was using the deck as an example, and I came across the word disponible in French. I don't know how to say it.
Mhm.
And for a second, I was like, oh yeah, that's like the English word dispone. Oh, that's not an English word. Like it was so automatic. I just assumed it was an English word, and I was like, wait,
Mhm.
that's a Spanish word. That is like it
Mhm.
means like I know exactly what it means and all these things, but it just it was so instant that it was just like I was like kind of taken aback by the fact that it was not an English cognate.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's the sort of place where ideally you're getting, but that'll probably come a little bit later.
Yeah. I think there's two. There's a bunch of different ways to notice automaticity. One of them is speed. How quickly can you understand something? Um, the other one that I've noticed is, do you remember learning it? Um,
That's a good
the
point. Yeah.
If I don't remember learning something and it just, for instance, I will occasionally come across Anki cards in my Anki deck that are 3, 4 years old, and I will not remember creating that card. I will not remember a time in my life when I needed to create that card. Like it'll be such a basic word. I'm like, I don't remember not knowing that word.
Yeah.
And that's a good indication of automaticity because it's like it's so embedded in who you are, you've forgotten a world in which you didn't know it.
Hmm. There's a
Cool
world
feeling.
when you were born, you didn't know any English either.
It's true.
Not a single word.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of crazy. Well, thank you for the question. Um, let's move on to the next one here. We have a question from VNCS on how long does it take to get comfortable speaking? I started talking in English about 2 months ago, but I still am not comfortable in it. So we're
Was
hitting
that
a
the
lot
whole
of these.
context?
Yeah, that's the whole question.
Oh, okay, got it.
We're talking again
um,
about the CACA
yeah.
a little bit here.
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. There's a bunch of different kinds of things that you can do for speaking. So if you're just like casually chatting with people, that's one type. That's what we call free flow speaking. But there's also corrected speaking, which is recording yourself, watching, trying to fix issues that you hear yourself making. Um, and so I'm not sure how many hours you've done in the past 2 months. I'm not sure what the breakup is between those two different activities. But since you're focused primarily on comfort and not accuracy, the comfort side you can just do free flow speaking with. Um, we tend to find that it starts to get comfortable if you already have a very solid foundation in the language. You can already understand audio and reading. It takes around 50 hours to start getting comfortable, and around 200 hours is when it gets really comfortable. So those are sort of the time metrics that I would propose as an answer to how long it takes.
Yeah, that's one of my things I baked into my plan for check. Once I hit 1,000 hours, that's
Hmm.
when I'm going to start speaking, and I'm going to really grind through it to get
Hmm.
200 hours before I go to the country.
Hmm.
Um, and so that is a thing that I've kept in mind because I am very aware that it takes a pretty good chunk of excuse me, takes a pretty good chunk of time to get comfortable. An
Yeah.
hour a day for nearly 2 months is a pretty big investment of speaking in something that
Hmm.
is a little awkward.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's really just keep doing it. Try not to be too hard on yourself and do the activities that are going to help you actually improve, and you'll get there.
Hmm.
Thank you for the question. And now we have a question from Dave 5/4. And it's a little bit of a long question, so I'm just going to read it out and then we can talk about it.
Okay.
Hello. There was a question where Ethan talked about the pros and cons of reading books for extensive reading. It got me thinking, why do I read Spanish fiction books? It's because that's what you're supposed to do in their mind, or in my mind. I'm reading in the first person. Most CI and immersion, as per most CI and immersion learning paradigms. But I've never been that much into fiction in my native language in adulthood, and when I really contemplated, I don't really care if I stop or can't or continue to read novels. It's not something that I want to be able to do. I can read at this level, and I recently graduated from young adult novels to actually easier adult novels. But I'm wondering if there's another way, like I want to be able to visit, if not live in a country that speaks Spanish as a native language and have well-rounded Spanish. I want to be able to talk to a Spanish-speaking therapist and do all of those sorts of things in Spanish. What if I use Link to go over a ton of dialogue from TV shows or movies? It's not 100% natural speech, but it's closer than many books.
Hmm.
And basically, is there a downside to not reading novels as a form of input?
Yeah, I don't think there's any requirement to read fiction novels. It's just that most people are interested in stories, and so it's easier to get into a fiction novel just because the story carries you along, even if you don't understand certain words. It's just an interesting thing for most people. But honestly, nonfiction is way easier than fiction. So uh, I know Ben,
Is
you've
it?
read a bunch of non. I find nonfiction way easier than fiction in terms of translate or in terms of reading the difficulty level of the words,
I guess that's true. Um, I was thinking
especially
that,
domain specific things.
yeah, once you get into the domain, I think it's easier. And I'm also, when I
Mhm.
think of nonfiction, I think of, I just immediately go to more like academic stuff rather than just things that are not fiction. Um,
Yeah, I'm thinking more like *Sapiens* is a nonfiction book
yeah.
that I listened to in Spanish, and it is way easier than what I'm currently listening to, which is uh, *Way of Kings*, right?
Oh,
like like the words used are way simpler, and also there's a lot of Latin cognates between the two, so it's like very easy to understand.
you
Even
don't
if
get the
I never
cognates
heard
from
them.
the made up words.
No, no cognates are
Yeah.
made up words.
Okay. I see what you mean. I think I've just read so much fiction that for me, they just end up sort of feeling similar. Like I'd listened to I just finished Juramentada, which is the third of
I'm in the
the
middle of
Wave
it.
King series.
Yeah.
And like to me, it was basically the same difficulty as Sapiens, just 4 times the length in terms of the book. God, that was such
No,
a long book.
not for me. *Sapiens* is way easier.
I think you're right. I think one of the not first things I read, but I definitely read pretty early on Atomic Habits in
Mhm.
Spanish, and that was
Yeah.
just a super solid level because, like you said, it's based on like real life stories and things that are pretty uh, logical. Like when you read
Mhm.
it, you go, "Yeah, that makes sense. I can understand how the sentence like, makes
There's no
uh,
mystery.
right." It's not like what is a what's a grieve? What's a like whatever these random words are that nobody knows, and it's yeah. So
Yeah, there's not a lot of poetic license taken in uh, just like normal nonfiction books.
yeah,
They just write much more clearly
hmm
and descriptively. I'd imagine that like biographies are also relatively similar to that. So
yeah,
that might be
probably.
another area. I do find that like history is pretty difficult just because there's so many historical terms and historical domain words
That's
that
just
I'm just like,
nonfiction fiction.
Anyways, but back to the original question. No,
Yeah.
you don't need to focus on fiction at all. You can do entirely nonfiction. In terms of focusing your efforts on things that are more day to day language, I would actually say that fiction is the absolute wrong thing to focus on. There are
Uh-oh.
like,
I think it's going to say absolutely the wrong thing to do. Oh, yeah.
oh, did I die?
Hang on, Ethan.
Am I back?
You're a little bit. You had a. Now
I had
you're
a hiccup.
delayed. Oh, now you're just staring at me. That's creepy.
See, this is dumb. I don't know why. I'm literally plugged in. I don't.
We love internet problems.
Yeah, I pay for super fast internet, and I'm
Oh,
plugged directly into the
you're
router.
back.
This is so frustrating. I need to call
Sucks to be
Comcast. Be like,
you.
what the heck?
Yeah, that's
Um, yeah. Anyways, fiction
that's too bad.
novels are not the right thing to focus on if you care about day to day language and you don't like fiction. Just like jettison them from your plan.
It might be my internet, hopefully, and it's not actually coming through on stream, but
Oh, maybe.
that's good. So, anyways,
Okay.
I think we answered the question. In short, no, you don't need to read fiction. It's just people like stories sometimes.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think there. It does seem to be my internet in this case.
Okay.
Maybe we're back. I'm going to assume we're back now because I see you.
Okay. I can hear
Okay.
you.
Next question here is a question that we slotted in here because we've been discussing it sort of recently. When should I focus on a specific dialect for my language?
I would generally recommend as early as possible. The um, the challenge, it also depends on like how different the dialects are. So like the sound of British English and the sound of American English are very, very different. Like if you understand one of those, you does not mean you can understand the other, even if the words are exactly the same, just because of how different they are pronounced. It's especially true with like Scottish. Like I'm a native English speaker, and I can barely understand Scottish English. I usually have to use the subtitles when I watch like Scottish TV shows. So focusing your efforts on one dialect and really, really getting good at that is a what I would recommend to anybody doing this. The one exception is if you just like can't find enough content that you like in that dialect. So like for me with Spanish, I did not focus on a dialect. I like watched things from all over the place because I didn't register at the time that that might cause problems. And I was like, oh, I want to understand everybody. And as a result, like my speaking is just so weird. People are constantly like, "Where are you from?" Because I like they say I sound like Spaniard Spanish, but I don't use Spain Spanish, or I don't use Spain Spanish in my speech. So it's just this weird mix of things. I'll also use like words from Colombia or like slang from Mexico, and it definitely like causes weird issues in my speech. I would also say that I don't have the like best understanding of any specific dialect right now because my experience is just across a whole bunch of different dialects. One of my next steps with Spanish is to focus down on just the Mexican or one of the Mexican dialects and accents just to get really, really, really good at that. Um, because I still feel like I'm lacking in that last bit. So, yeah, I would say if you focus earlier on, it's going to make the whole process easier and faster. You'll understand at a higher level faster. You'll pick up the words much, much faster. You'll be able to understand the accent much faster. And when you start to speak, it'll be more consistent. So, if you are the kind of person that can find everything that you want within a single dialect, then I would recommend just doing that. But if you need to incorporate things from outside of that because those are the things you're actually interested in, then by all means, feel free to do that. Just to we try to prioritize interest and engagement. And so if you feel like limiting yourself to one dialect is hurting your engagement, then that's when I would make the exception. Ben, you still with us? Ben,
I'm getting choppy internet. Are you done speaking?
I am done speaking.
Okay, yeah. It's definitely me. I don't know what's
Yeah.
happening.
You want to turn off your video
So
and
don't
just do audio?
Comcast that readily.
Okay.
But I heard what you said and definitely agree. I can, yeah, I think it's okay for now. I think they said my audio is okay, which is the most important part.
Yep.
And I just wanted to add that I think it's also really helpful to not necessarily pick an accent, but pick a country really early on, because you can pick the specific accent later if you want to like have an accent or something. But picking a country also reduces the difficulty of choosing what to watch or what to immerse in, because you can just find stuff from that country. And so in like the case of, well, there's only one country that speaks Czech, although Slovak is a very similar language. But like I can just go to the state media sites or like all the things that are in the Czech Republic and use those, and just to sort of assume that that is what I can just use those. For Spanish, if you just pick Colombia or Mexico, you can just watch the media that is popular there. And occasionally those are going to be from other countries, but it's a lot easier to focus on that. You can focus on those words. Even though like the written language, yeah, it doesn't vary that much and it's pretty easy to pick up. You can also do that later. And it just reduces that decision fatigue, and you can start to focus in on something that you potentially have more connection to anyways pretty early on, and then potentially expand it to a specific dialect. Like there are tons of dialects in every single country on earth. And so you will actually likely have to pick something at some point, but you don't have to do that specific like on day one.
Mhm.
Plus, most people don't know about all of the various dialects of their target language on day one. They figure that out much later.
That's true.
But
Country is a lot easier to choose.
cool. Well, thank you for the question, us. And I think I want to get into this one as well, which is a pretty common question that we just see in general of when do I start sentence mining?
Yeah. Technically, you can do it at any time, but it's very hard to do early on. So, like, if you're studying a language that does not have a starter deck, and you like are struggling to find like more than a couple hundred high frequency words, you may need to start sentence mining immediately just out of necessity. Czech, for example. Um, Generally, though, we recommend doing it at around 2,000 words. So if you if you at around 2,000 words, you're going to start to actually encounter a lot more of those 1T sentences that you want to mine when you do sentence mining. You'll have a lot more options when you do create cards. One of the challenges of sentence mining below 2,000 is that it is rare to come across sentences where you actually understand the whole sentence except for one word,
Mhm.
just because you don't know enough words. The exception being if you're using graded materials or comprehensible input content. If you're using those easier materials, you may be able to start sentence mining and finding 1-2 sentences very early on. They may not be the most natural, but it doesn't really matter at that early phase. So up to you. If you are feeling like the pre-made decks are no longer serving you, or you're not interested in them, you want to do sentence mining, which I do recommend doing sentence mining and not forever just doing pre-made decks, because the sentence mining process reinforces a lot of the things that you're learning. You invest in each card, and that you choose the words you want to learn, and it just creates a stronger memory and bond to that word. And you remember the context of when you saw it. So there's a lot of reasons to do sentence mining, but it's just hard early on in the process. So 2,000 is where we recommend it, but if you want to do it as early as 1,000, that's fine. If you want to do it later at 3,000, that's fine too.
Yeah, you might want to do it later if you're learning a language where you have to learn every single word, right? There's basically no cognates, and you might
Yeah.
end up doing it earlier if there's a ton of cognates and you basically know all the words already. So you're essentially know like 8,000 words just when you start because of the sheer number of cognates or whatever.
Yeah.
Cool, great. Well, let's get to some questions from the chat here. There's a couple in here. Gaijin-san asked, if you feel like you can discuss it, Ethan, I'm curious what your current vision for Refold is. What is the business, and what are our plans in the future for monetization? What's the big picture of Refold as of right now, 2024, February 29th?
Yeah. So
Well,
the lost her Ben.
yeah, camera
Yeah.
overheated.
So the big picture has always been that. So language learning is a fragmented industry. There are literally tens of thousands of schools, apps, businesses, etc. And my premise for Refold from the beginning was, hey, this is a problem that has been worked on for literally a century. People have been learning languages for tens of thousands of years, and we have an enormous amount of investment, an enormous number of businesses and teams working on this problem. So why is it still so broken? And so I've always really considered us to be the glue that ties other things together rather than trying to like replace any of the other tools. The goal has always been how do we create this sort of coherent process that allows people to start on day zero and go all the way to fluency. And they would stick with us the entire time, even if they would use different tools or different techniques throughout the entire process. And we would just guide them through that. So that's the overarching idea that kind of informs everything that we do. All of our monetization that we have right now is really based around the fact that um, we've just noticed problems. Like we noticed that there was a lack of good starter decks for a bunch of languages, so we started creating those. We noticed that people were struggling with building the habits on a regular basis to actually implement the recommendations that we have. So we shifted our focus to a lot of the more behavior change habit aspects. Um, and going into the future, we really want to focus in on that part of it. I sort of see it as sort of three pillars that keep everything up, or the three legs of the table. So one of them is the methodology, the techniques, what you do. One of them is the tooling, the things that you build in order to actually to assist with the techniques and the methodology. And then there's the behavior change. How do you actually show up every day and do what you need to do? And there's a million people working on the tooling. We've already done a lot of the methodology. We feel pretty solid on that. It's the behavior change stuff that we feel still needs a lot of work. We really want to help people show up every day and continue to invest towards their goal. So we are building an app right now that is specifically focused on how do we help people show up every day to learn a language, and then how do we give them the right expectations? How do we track their progress and their efforts? And then how do we give them accountability and support throughout that entire process to stick with it long term? So all of our plans in the at least in the next 5 years or so are really focused on that part of the problem of how do we help people show up every day. That will come out as an app in the next few months. We're already in testing with it, and there will be some freemium option on it. Some of it will be free, and then some of it will be paid, and we'll probably like add additional options onto that. And so that's the long-term monetization strategy for the company, at least for this consumer brand version of it. There are some other ideas of like, how do we work with schools? How do we work with businesses? But we haven't really thought about that because we're really trying to just focus on how do we help you learners show up every day and actually accomplish your goals. So I think we lost Ben.
Nope, I'm here.
Oh, great. Okay.
I was letting it charge a bit, let you answer that question.
Okay.
So I don't think it overheated. I think it just died. But we're here. We have 3 minutes left, so we're fine.
Right. So I hope that answered the question.
I think so. I think it's a good overview. They asked for a general idea anyway, so.
Sure.
And then the final question here is another common one that I think it's good to have a response for. It's just sort of an update from you on Matt's relationship with Refold as of now.
Mm-hmm.
Is Matt ever coming back? Who is Matt?
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah. So Matt stepped away, was that like a year and a half ago now? When he went to Japan. And there were no like specific plans for him to return at any point, honestly. From his perspective, he is very interested in language learning and specifically in Japanese. But the way that he phrased it to me is that he kind of wants to be like an Olympic coach for Japanese rather than what we do, which is really about trying to get people into it. Like we're not really focused on helping people achieve the super highest level. We're really hoping to just help people achieve their goals of fluency. And that means really investing in that beginner phase of the process, which is just frankly like not something that interests Matt. Like he did that for 7 years essentially with his YouTube channel, and he's kind of done with it. So he's still involved. Like he still gets updates. Like we still chat occasionally, but there's no plans for him to come back and work on this project just because he has his own projects that are more interesting to him to work on.
Cool. Thank you for putting that into a nice clip that we can use to answer that question. And then I guess we have a little time for maybe one more. What is your opinion on practicing memorized sentence patterns and then just switching out keywords.
Mhm.
That is from Brody Oliver.
Yeah. So I would call this ad libbing or mad libbing. Um, and it's a really really useful tool for language hacking. This is exactly how I learned Spanish when I first started. There's certain sentence patterns that you just swap in the right words, and boom, you can say all sorts of things. Like in Spanish, voy a comer, voy a dormir. You just memorize a bunch of dictionary words, and you have voy a, and it, like suddenly you can use the future tense without knowing any of the other conjugations. So those memorized sentence patterns are extremely useful for learning to speak very rapidly. They don't help at all with understanding because nobody speaks that way. But if you're just trying to get your point across, or you're like you need to go to the country in the near future and you need to like be able to function, extremely useful. Highly recommend doing them, just because it gives you the foundation to express yourself. Um, I don't think it's particularly useful if you can already understand the language. Um, if you're already a level where you know tens of that, go ahead.
Oh, if you're going to say tens of thousands of words, yeah, that's different. But I was going to say, I think it's really useful if you, like, let's say you're going to the country in 8 months, you can spend like 6 months focus on just understanding, and then hack your way to be able to say some things, and put all of the like the processing of the language onto them. Because yeah, nobody speaks like that, but they're going to understand you if you put together a basic sentence. But you have to be able to understand their completely random response after it. And so I think it is really quite useful if you want to do like a quick output version of the language where you focus a ton on understanding, and then for just the last couple weeks or months before you actually need to use the language, you drill those more hacky things. Then you get the best of both worlds in some ways, where you can actually have a conversation because you can understand pretty much whatever they say. Not like that complicated, but like if it's even if it's off script, you get it. But you also need to be able to say something to continue that conversation. And even if it's a little bit unnatural, they'll figure it out because they're a native speaker and they can just figure it out because they're a native speaker.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So that's when I think
Yeah.
it's
So
really useful.
yeah, absolutely. If you're on a specific timeline, then it's extremely useful because, like Ben said, you do need that ability to understand, and so you should focus on that first. But you don't need to be perfect with that. If you're just going to the country for a couple weeks or for a visit, but you do need to be able to express your core needs in order to get along with people, to meet people, to function in society. And as long as you have some ability to understand, like that's a great way to sort of shortcut the entire language learning process. You're not really aiming at fluency. You're just aiming at being like functional and competent when you show up in the country. And if that is in a year's time, then, say 2/3, 1/3, 2/3 focused on input and then 1/3 focused on that language hacking output is probably how I would tackle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd probably even say more like 75%, 25%.
Sure, whatever you want.
But yeah, I'm curious to try it. Hopefully, in the coming years, I'd really love to do an experiment like that,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like, okay, my goal is not to become fluent in Japanese, but I would love to try, because a lot of people have like their one big trip a year that they can do for a week or 2 weeks, and they would love to be able to interact with the language and the people there, but they also don't necessarily want to dedicate 6 years to learning a language. And so,
Sure.
what is the like middle ground there?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah, we're definitely not militant about only doing the specific recommendations in the site. There's a lot of reasons for people to not follow that.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't care about sounding perfect, if they don't care about, or if they have a time constraint, either because of a test or because of a trip, there's all sorts of reasons to modify the standard roadmap that we have. And we're actually in the process of sort of redesigning the whole roadmap from scratch and like putting everything and organizing everything together. And one of the sections in that is, when should I modify it for which situations, and how would you modify it in those situations? So we will have some content around that coming up.
Exciting stuff.
Mhm.
Well, I think that is everything for today. It is time. We're at time. Thank you all for hanging out, and specifically to you, Ethan, for answering these questions.
Thanks, Ben, for hosting. Sorry you had internet problems, and sorry,
Yeah,
sorry to everybody on the stream that we had internet problems.
yeah, my bad. Sorry. Hopefully, I think I'm not hosting the stream, so I don't think it actually dropped anything. So
Yeah.
we're mostly fine, but
Okay.
good. Well, thank you everybody for coming, and we will see you around.